Heya, and welcome to the Art of Beauty Masterclass Retouching Lessons. My name is Veronika Morozova, and I'm better known as MV Retouching, and in 2022, I celebrated 10 years in the retouching field. I've been working together with Tamara since 2018, and 2 years ago, I became her main retoucher. During those 4 years, we have proven our capability to create amazing art together multiple times, and I'm here to show you how you can do the same. After you finally managed to shoot like a pro together with Tamara, it's finally time to learn how to edit like a master. We are going to cover some basics such as technical knowledge, workstation suggestions, camera raw settings, and then jump right into the editing part, where we will cover cloning and healing, dodging and burning, the color grading process, and touch-ups. So let's not waste any more time and grab a pen and a coffee and let me guide you through the last beauty retouching masterclass you'll ever need. Before beginning with the actual retouching process, I will need you to listen closely to these basic fundamentals. It is absolutely fine if you feel overwhelmed with the amount of information you hear, but don't worry, we will work through it together and make it work like a charm for you. This part is going to contain interesting information for experts and beginners. In this lesson, I will explain the different types of files, how to sort them and organize them, talk about the relevant color profiles and bit depth. My goal here is to make sure that we all are on the same page and speaking one language. And I want to start it off with the different types of files. Before you get into your retouching journey, I think it's really important to be sufficient and keep everything tidy. Having good file management will improve your workflow, will save you time, and protect you from accidental loss of files. So what kind of files will you come across and how do you sort them? Raw files. Raw files are the files that you get straight from your camera. The only time you will use them is when you open your photo in Camera Raw. PSD, TIFFs. These are the layered working files, which contain, as the name says, all the layering and coloring, which can be reversed or changed later if needed. From my experience, I prefer using TIFF files for several reasons. TIFF is the industry standard file. That means that other graphic software will usually be able to open images in the TIFF format, while that's not always the case for PSD files. You can also usually send TIFF files directly to printers to have your photos printed. And TIFF files are usually easier to preview on different platforms. Web-optimized files are simple JPEGs with the correct resolution and accurate color profile for social networks, portfolios, websites, etc. Now that we know what kind of files we're working with, I'll show you how I organize my folders to never lose anything. Here's an example of my working folder. When my projects are not finalized, I keep all the versions separately to be able to keep track of it and go back to the previous version if needed. At the beginning, we see the raw folder, which contains all the raw files for this project. File 1 is the first TIFF file I end up with after pushing the file through Camera Raw. At the beginning of my process, I always create a copy of this file to keep the original picture away from any mistakes. The next file is a TIFF file that is tagged 0. That's my way of tagging working files, and my clients never see them. This system solely works for my organizing purposes, and you don't have to do it the same way, but it works for me. File 3 is the final TIFF file with pure retouching that my client will review and give me feedback on. It can be tagged 1, 2, 3, etc. depending on how many feedbacks I get and how many retouching changes were done. After the general retouch has been approved, I create the last and final TIFF file with coloring on top of it with the tag CC, which stands for color correction. I always send this version out with the separate coloring layers, so it will be easier for my client to change something immediately if they wanted to. After the picture is approved by my client, I will only keep 2 files, the original TIFF file and the final color-corrected one. I like to come back to the old files after a few years of not seeing them to have a fresh view of what I did and what I've learned throughout those years, so I never delete original files. It is a really satisfying feeling to see your own mistakes and realize that your approach is much different now. Easily put, it is a sign of growth. On to the next interesting topic, color profile and bit depth. The following information can sound confusing at first, but don't worry, I'm here to clear things up. The two main and most popular options for color profiles are Adobe RGB and sRGB. So what's the difference? Adobe RGB profile is less versatile than sRGB, but has a wider range of color and also covers all the colors from the CMYK color space used for printing. But sadly, most devices can't reproduce this wide range of color on their screens, so sRGB is a must if we're talking about internet images. So when should you use which profile? Most of the professionals insist that you should mostly use Adobe RGB and change it to sRGB only before posting the pictures. And I want to disagree with them. If you know that your photo is not going to be printed and will be shown only in your social networks, then there is no point of using Adobe RGB. Your viewers just won't see the difference, and you can end up with a way different color because of the color range shortage. So my advice is, keep the sRGB color profile and don't introduce yourself to more problems with unnecessary profile changes. Unless again you ever intend to print your images, then start off with Adobe RGB. It's the same story with bit depth. Bit depth defines the amount of color information available for each pixel in an image. The more bit of color information allocated to each pixel, the greater the number of available color and the more accurate their display, which affects the size of the image. Simply put, the higher the bit depth, the better your image quality, to an extent, and the higher the size of your file. But don't get tricked by this information and don't think that you have to keep everything in 16 or 32 bits now. That is a big misbelief that can cause you a lot of pain, such as working with heavy files and having no empty space on your computer. Sounds familiar? Tamar already made a similar example earlier with 24 versus 60 megapixels file, and I'll show you just the same. Here's a 16-bit versus 8-bit picture side by side. Do you see the difference? Probably not, because the human eye can't differentiate it. I know that technical stuff is always annoying and boring, but again, you will have to understand that the base of everything has to be set up perfectly in order to become pro at beauty retouching. But let's rip this band-aid off and look at the gear I would suggest using in the next lesson. See you there.